Alright, so today what we're going to be doing is looking at the Camco Rhino 28-gallon tote tank. This is actually the second one that I've owned. The first one I took to Paladuro Canyon on its maiden voyage, and about an eighth of a mile down the road when we were towing it, it was full of gray water. What happened was this little nut here that's just driven on the end of the axle popped off while we were driving, and therefore the wheel came off and it drug the tank. We only drug it maybe 15 feet or so, and wore a hole in the bottom of the tank right about here, because the concrete's real rough there, and we were spilling gray water all over the street. So, to Camco's credit, I emailed them, I called them, and they got back with me the next day, emailed them 2 pictures of what happened, and they sent me this one for free. Didn't need any proof of purchase or anything like that. They were really great about it. What we're gonna do today is replace the axle and put some new wheels on there. I'm gonna walk you through the process. We'll see how it goes. I actually got this idea off of another person on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. All right, so here are the materials that we're going to be using to try to fix this thing. There's a couple of 13.2 inch pneumatic tires that I got from Lowe's. They come with these spacers that we are going to use in our project here. Also got some 5/8 inch all thread here, steel rod. It's a little bit small to fit into the channel. It wobbles a little bit. I'll show you that here in a second. So the video that I watched that kind of walked through this procedure, he used electrical tape to put some extra diameter on the rod. We're gonna give it a try, see how that works out. We've got some 5/8 inch nylock nuts. Hopefully that'll prevent stuff from backing out and moving around too much. And then some 5/8 inch washers as well. So let's get started on trying to fix this thing, and we'll see how it goes. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is remove this axle from the body of the tote. I'm hoping I can just use a large flathead screwdriver and pry it out of there. So let's get going on that. Alright, so 2 feet of all thread is too short by the time you get the all the wheel assembly and everything put on there. So this is a 36 inch, a 3-foot section that I'm going to cut down to size. What I'm going to do is build one wheel assembly as close to this end as I can, in this range somewhere. I'll go ahead and put the other wheel assembly on this side, and then I'll mark it and just cut it with everything on there, hopefully. I wanted to show you, when you put this 5/8 inch all thread in there, there's some play. It wiggles around a little bit. I want that to be solid so that those threads don't wear a hole in the assembly. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and build out this wheel assembly first, so I know where to start my tape at, and I'm just going to line it with tape all the way to this end. Alright, so here I'm using a pair of vice grips to hold the threaded rod still while I thread the first nylon nut onto the rod. The nylon grip's pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with the holding power that it has. I think it'll be okay. I was just checking the fit there to see how much further I needed to go in. Here I am assembling the wheel assembly. You saw I put the long spacer on there. I ended up taking that off and going with short ones. Got about 3 or 4 threads poking out from the nut. I think that's good. You want to tighten the assembly down to where the washers are not clamping the wheel tight. You want the wheel to be able to spin freely, but you also don't want it to wobble on the axle. So I'm probably going to have to check this periodically and make sure that it's tightened to the appropriate amount. I suppose I could put a bead of or some Loctite on there also. Try to get them to stay still. I may try that if I end up having a lot of slippage. And I flip the axle around. I'm working on the other side. I marked the axle with a Sharpie at the point that I wanted to bring this nut down to, the inside nut down to. It probably would have been better to measure how much I needed and then cut the axle first, but I decided to do it this way because I wasn't sure. I ended up cutting the axle 3 times, which was a real pain because I changed the spacer to the short spacer, and then I measured wrong and ended up having to cut some more off. So it takes a while, even with the Sawzall, to get through that 5/8 inch rod, but it was okay. Wasn't too bad. In the end, I ended up leaving a little too much of the rod on there, but by the end of the 3rd cut, my blade was getting dull and I decided not to mess with it anymore. Alright, so this is the finished product so far. I guess it's not finished. But what I did off camera, if you remember, I had those wide spacers in there. I didn't like that. I thought it set the wheel off too far from the body of the tote. It would put more stress on the axle that way, so I replaced those wide spacers with thin ones and had to cut it down. Obviously mismeasured a little bit. There's too much axle sticking out over here, but I'm not cutting that threaded steel rod again. That's the 3rd time that I cut it because I can't measure. It's just going to stay like that. So what I've got to do now is mark where the tape needs to go, and then I'll tape from here all the way down to about there. I'll put tape on to protect the body. I don't want the threads cutting into the body, and to fill up that loose gap so that the axle is tight in there. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be back with you shortly. Alright, so here we go. This is the finished product. You see I put electrical tape all down the axle there. It's really tight in the groove. Now all I've got to do is make sure there's air in the tires, and I'm going to fill it up with water and take it for a tow around the neighborhood and see how it goes. Alright, so I did take the Rhino for a test drive around the neighborhood, but the video footage was no good, so I figured I'd show you the real thing here. We're at the campground and we've filled it up. It is completely full with gray water right now, so it's heavy. It's at capacity, and we have to tow it maybe a half mile or so to the dump station. So that's what you're seeing here. Overall, the new axle and wheels performed very well. It was a much smoother ride. All the vibration that you used to get from the old wheels, you could hear all the way through the truck. Those weren't there. It's very smooth. We went about 5 to 7 miles an hour still, like the manual says. Here we are pulling up to the dump station, and I was very pleased with the performance of the new setup.